Nolan Wells, the full timeline, and what's actually confirmed. For 3 weeks, nobody would say on the record why the FBI was even involved in this case. Tonight they finally did, in writing, and it isn't the reason most people assumed. This is true crime evidence. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss stories like this one. Here's what changed. For weeks, why federal agents were involved in this case was answered only in fragments, until the Bureau's Jackson field office released a complete written statement. It confirms real assistance, tools, and partnerships, while stating plainly that Jackson County remains the lead agency from start to finish. Buried in that same statement is the actual reason federal resources are here at all. Interstate threats made against people connected to this case, running parallel to the family's own investigation, not merged into it. That's support, not command, and it has nothing to do with Nolan's death directly. On the threats themselves, here's what's actually on the record, from the people it happened to, not filtered through anonymous claims. Christine has said she and Elmore received anonymous hate mail targeting their own legal team while they were in the middle of planning their son's funeral, not weeks later, while they were choosing a church and a eulogy. Nolan's friend Tristan Shepard has said publicly that he and others have received threats online since this case drew national attention. Jackson County Chancery Judge Ashley Cole, whose family has already been connected to this case through her son, has said on Facebook that her family has received a wave of death threats of their own. An artificial intelligence-generated fake video depicting Christine herself has reportedly circulated online, fabricated footage of a grieving mother while she was simultaneously fighting for a police report she's legally entitled to. We're not going to repeat the specific content of any of that, because doing so serves no purpose except giving it more reach. What's beyond dispute is that whoever is doing this, regardless of what they believe happened to Nolan, is committing a serious crime, and it's having a real chilling effect on anyone who might otherwise be willing to come forward with information. Now, before we go further into the evidence itself, it's worth spending a few minutes on who Nolan Xavier Wells actually was, before he became a name attached to a grand jury referral. He grew up in Ocean Springs, Mississippi, one of 6 children raised by Christine and Elmore Wansley. Football was close to a family language in that house. At Ocean Springs High School, his coach, Jake Bramlett, has described him as someone who led by example rather than volume, someone other players followed without needing to be told to. His principal remembered him as one of the kindest, hardest-working students to come through the building. Christine has told one story publicly more than once because it seems to capture something true about him. In a math class, there was a special needs student in the room, and before anyone else could jump in, Nolan quietly got the rest of the class to hold back so she could answer a question on her own. When she got it right, he led the celebration, genuinely. Her teacher emailed the family afterward just to tell them about it. Christine has said she always warned him to be careful with a heart that big, because it isn't always returned the same way. After high school, Nolan walked on as a freshman wide receiver at Southwest Mississippi Community College, number 16, 6'1", a general business major. He'd just finished his first year and was due back for summer camp on Monday, July 6th. That deadline matters, because it tells you exactly what this trip was supposed to be, a short, ordinary break before the real work of the season started again, not an open-ended summer blowout. Independence Day fell on a Saturday that year, and Nolan spent it the way this same circle of friends had spent it before, without incident, a boat trip to Horn Island, a federally protected barrier island about 10 miles off the coast with no development, no roads, and no year-round law enforcement presence, reachable only by boat. Jackson County NAACP President Curly Clark has urged caution publicly, saying he doesn't want anyone jumping to conclusions that could later prove wrong and hurt this family further, while also acknowledging plainly that race is part of the equation here and that he wants the investigation to be deliberate enough that the facts, whatever they turn out to be, actually come out. Now let's build the actual timeline, using only what's independently documented rather than anyone's memory of a chaotic afternoon. According to GPS records obtained from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, the boat carrying Nolan's group left its dock at 9:56 that morning and reached Horn Island at 11:14, an ordinary crossing with nothing unusual about either timestamp. The last confirmed sighting of Nolan alive places him on the island around 3 o'clock that afternoon. Here's where I need to flag something directly rather than smooth it over. According to this reconstruction, a distress call requesting towing assistance went out from the group's boat around that same hour, roughly 3 o'clock. Earlier reporting on this case, which we've covered in previous updates, placed that same tow call closer to 4 o'clock, with the dispatcher asking whether everyone aboard was accounted for and a head count of 7 given in response. Those two versions of the same call's timing don't match, and it matters, because whether that call happened at 3 o'clock, right around Nolan's last sighting, or closer to 4 o'clock, nearly an hour later, changes how you read everything that follows it. I'm not going to pick one silently. Both timestamps have appeared in reporting on this case, and this is exactly the kind of detail a formal timeline, not competing recaps, needs to settle. What isn't in dispute is that the mechanical failure itself was real. The boat's bilge pump had failed, and the vessel was taking on water. Nobody invents a boat emergency in advance of a disappearance that hasn't happened yet, and that detail independently corroborates part of what Judge Cole said publicly early on, that the group left around 4:30 because of a malfunctioning pump. According to the GPS data, the boat left Horn Island at 4:31, under tow at reduced speed for several miles before returning to normal cruising speed, and reached its home dock at 5:44. Less than 10 minutes later, at 5:52, it went out again into Fort Bayou, back at the dock by 6:06, then out a third time to the Fort Bayou boat launch around 7:19, before being towed overland to the boat owner's residence. Why the boat needed 2 more trips to a separate waterway that same evening, after returning from an island where a friend was still missing, remains one of the specific, unaddressed threads in this case. So here's what's actually confirmed from that stretch of the day, kept separate from what isn't. Confirmed, the mechanical failure was genuine. The boat left the island around 4:31 and returned to a mainland dock roughly 70 minutes later. Not confirmed, why Nolan wasn't aboard when it left, and what filled the window between his last sighting and that departure. Nobody called Christine right away once the boat came back without him. Not, by every account, because anyone was hiding anything, but because this group had made this trip before, and an evening without word from an 18-year-old on a holiday weekend wasn't yet a crisis in anyone's mind. That changed just after 11 o'clock that night, when her phone rang, and it wasn't Nolan, it was one of his friends. She said publicly that this was the moment something in her shifted, because his friends simply didn't call her directly like that. Around that same hour, a call also went out to the U.S. Coast Guard reporting Nolan missing. Their assessment that night was that the situation as described didn't meet the threshold for immediate deployment. No cutter went out. No aircraft went up. That decision, made in the very first hour anyone official was told something was wrong, is one of the quieter but more consequential details in this entire timeline, because it meant real hours passed before any organized search began. Christine spent the next stretch of that night trying to track her son down herself before turning fully to law enforcement, and ran into a jurisdictional problem nobody had warned her about, since it wasn't immediately clear which agency actually had authority over a missing person case originating on a barrier island. She and Elmore eventually met a deputy in a McDonald's parking lot to lay out everything they knew. By morning, Elmore couldn't wait on process any longer and took his own boat out on July 5th to search near Horn Island himself, while an organized search effort stood up in parallel on shore, a command post at the Lake Mars boat launch, and eventually the Sheriff's Department, the Department of Marine Resources, the National Park Service, the Coast Guard, and the Volunteer United Cajun Navy all involved. For 2 full days, that search covered land and water with no result. Early on the morning of Monday, July 6th, a National Park Service ranger spotted a body in the water along the island's northwestern shore. Sheriff Ledbetter confirmed it matched Nolan. 2 autopsies are still what nearly every open question in this case comes back to. The state autopsy was carried out July 7th. Investigators have said there's currently no preliminary indication of drug or alcohol involvement, though officials have stressed that reading is preliminary, pending full toxicology, which could still take weeks. One fact both the family and the official investigation agree on without qualification: the swimsuit recovered on the body matched the one Nolan had been photographed wearing that same day. What they don't agree on is what that fact means. Crump has argued that a genuine athlete in peak condition doesn't simply disappear unnoticed from a crowded holiday beach with hundreds of people on it. Coroner Bruce Lynn has countered that the current on that end of Horn Island runs strong, and that stretch of coastline has a documented history of drownings independent of this specific case. Brian Trasher of the Cajun Navy sits somewhere between both, saying the rip current that day was strong enough to overwhelm even strong swimmers, while also wondering aloud how nobody among that many people reportedly noticed anyone in distress. None of the three men is necessarily wrong about what he's individually describing. The independent autopsy conducted in Washington by Dr. Roger Mitchell still hadn't been released as of the most recent press conference, with Crump confirming the family's own doctors don't have their results back either. Until either report is public, every timeline reconstruction, this one included, is sitting on top of an incomplete medical record. On the video, here's the corrected record, plainly. Early in this case, Crump told multiple outlets his team believed the voice heard demanding a phone back on a widely circulated clip belonged to Nolan. That claim spread fast and was treated by much of the public as settled. It has since been directly disputed. Tristan Shepard came forward to ABC News and said the voice is his own, from a separate altercation entirely, and that Nolan isn't shown in the footage at all, that he was nearby in the water, out of frame. Pressed directly on this later, Crump was noticeably more careful, saying the original claim came from one witness, that another witness has since disputed it, and that his team now has audio experts trying to determine, if possible, whose voice is actually on the recording, unresolved as of that press conference. He said going forward his team will frame single witness claims explicitly as claims rather than presenting them as confirmed. That's a real, meaningful correction, and it's worth remembering given how widely the original version still circulates online as though it were never revisited. Shepard's fuller account adds real context. He said there was nothing suspicious about the phone situation, that everyone in the group left their phones on the boat that day to keep them dry, his own included, alongside roughly 15 other phones on the dashboard. He's also said the reason Nolan stayed behind was that he'd met a girl and wanted to keep talking with her, planning to catch a later ride with another boat. Nolan's parents, through their attorney, have responded to Shepard's account with more grace than a lot of the discourse around this case allows, saying they've never personally met him, can't discount what he remembers, and welcome every account because what they actually want, before anything else, is the truth. On the phone itself, separate from the disputed video, when Nolan was reported missing, the device wasn't with him. Christine and her sister tracked it themselves through a family location-sharing app and located it at a friend's residence, rather than being handed it directly by anyone. Both of his Snapchat accounts were empty when they accessed it. No saved photos or video, with some text messages appearing to be missing as well. To be fair about what that does and doesn't prove, content like that isn't necessarily gone the moment it disappears from view, and Snapchat's own retention window is more forgiving than a strict 24 hours unless a user has specifically shortened it. So the timing here is suggestive, not conclusive, on its own. Deleted data can often still be recovered forensically, and separate carrier-side records exist independent of whatever remains on the device itself. Sheriff Ledbetter's office has said it never had physical possession of the phone and formally requested it for extraction, after the family's own investigators had already examined it first. Following the family's July 15th meeting with the district attorney's office, both sides agreed to a mutual, simultaneous inspection, meaning the family's experts and law enforcement's experts examined the device together, seeing the same data pulled the same way, at the same time, which removes most of the disputes that would otherwise follow over chain of custody or whose findings deserve more weight. Legal analysts have called that arrangement genuinely unusual, the kind that typically doesn't happen without sustained public and legal pressure. That same July 15th meeting produced the case's current legal trajectory. Once the sheriff's office finishes its investigation, it goes to a grand jury, standard procedure in Jackson County for any unnatural or suspicious death, and not by itself confirmation that criminal charges are coming. A grand jury here is a panel of roughly 15 to 25 citizens reviewing whatever evidence prosecutors present and deciding whether it supports moving forward, not a trial, with no defense presentation and no media access to the proceedings themselves. Former Judge Carlos Moore has raised real concerns about this specific DA's office, pointing to a prior case involving a fatal police shooting where he says overwhelming evidence still failed to produce an indictment, and has said he intends to watch this one closely so it doesn't quietly stall the same way. Attorney Tyler Bailey has offered a more measured read, that a grand jury referral is genuinely routine procedure here, not proof foul play is confirmed or even strongly suspected. Both are worth holding at once, and Bailey has added something worth remembering specifically. If this does reach a grand jury, the realistic range of charges is broad and doesn't necessarily point toward homicide at all. It could involve obstruction, accessory after the fact, or other offenses tied to how the aftermath was handled, entirely separate from who, if anyone, caused a death, a forensic question that depends on what the pending autopsies actually show. Attorney Eric Hers, leading the family's independent investigation, has said his team is fielding 50 to 100 calls a day from people connected to Horn Island that afternoon. He's also flagged something specific and checkable rather than a matter of competing memory. Under Mississippi law, crime victims, which extends to immediate family in a death case, are entitled to an incident report within 72 hours. That window had long passed by the July 15th meeting, and the family still hadn't received it. Christine has said the last contact from the sheriff's department before that meeting was the previous Tuesday, and even that wasn't initiated by them. She was the one who texted asking for an update. Following the meeting, the DA's office agreed to become the family's primary point of contact through a dedicated victim advocate, an acknowledgement Christine has appreciated, even though it only came after her legal team raised the gap directly. On July 20th, Nolan was laid to rest at Centerpoint Church in Ocean Springs. Christine made a funeral costs. The service was live-streamed in full. Christine specifically reached out to coach Les George to make sure former teammates from every level of Nolan's football career could attend, thanked local officials who'd checked in with the family nearly every day, asked that any demonstrations near the service stay peaceful, and had a message specifically for Nolan's friends, the same friends whose accounts remain at the center of so much dispute, asking them to take care of their own mental health, acknowledging that this has been a lot for them too. Before closing, two corrections worth restating because both shaped public belief before either was verified. A pool party photo that spread online as proof Nolan was alive after July 4th was traced through metadata to June 27th, 8 full days before he ever set foot on Horn Island, and Shepard independently confirmed the date and the people in it. Crump has acknowledged his team reposted that image without authenticating it, specifically to ask the public if anyone recognized it, not as confirmed evidence, and that his team labels reposts as reposts for exactly that reason. And the viral video's quote, discussed above, went through the same arc, an unverified claim treated as settled fact for weeks, followed by a direct on-record correction. If you see a claim right now that either autopsy is already out, especially one naming a dramatic new finding, treat it with real skepticism until it's tied to a named, checkable source. One thing we're deliberately leaving out of tonight's update. There's speculation circulating online, some of it naming private individuals connected to Katie's family, and separately, commentary alleging a broader pattern of misconduct by the state medical examiner across other, unrelated cases. Neither has been independently verified. Both involve serious accusations against real people, and repeating the specifics here would do more harm than good, without actual sourcing behind it. If either becomes something more than speculation, we'll cover it properly, with names attached to claims and sources that can be checked. Here's the honest ledger as of tonight. Confirmed, the boat's documented movements from a 9:56 departure to an 11:14 arrival, a genuine mechanical failure, a 4:31 departure from the island, a 5:44 return to dock, formal identification of Nolan's body, a case headed toward a grand jury, a joint forensic phone inspection agreed to by both sides, and the FBI's limited, confirmed role addressing interstate threats. Unresolved. Exactly why Nolan wasn't on that boat when it left, what filled the roughly 90 minutes before it departed, whose voice is actually on that video, what if anything was deleted from his phone, and what both pending autopsies will ultimately conclude. No cause of death has been officially confirmed. No one has been named a suspect. No charges have been filed. This case is not closed. We'll bring you the next update the moment there's something real, sourced, and confirmed, not a moment before. If this is the kind of reporting you want, subscribe. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, and his family is still fighting for him.